In this build video, we will run through the step-by-step instructions to build the simple Hello World K2 SmartForm. If you need a refresher or are uncertain of what K2 SmartForms are, please refer to the Hello World application design topic for this version of the application for an overview of the K2 SmartForm. Being a fairly basic tutorial, we only have 4 steps to walk through to get this going. In step 1, we will show you some best practice tips on organizing your K2 applications within the K2 environment by learning how to prepare folders in the category system for the application. Then we will use those folders when we next create the Hello World view and form in steps 2 and 3 respectively. These 2 steps will introduce you to K2 SmartForms. You will learn how views and forms work together, and you will learn about the ability you have to manage formatting and controls within your forms. Finally, in step 4, we will test the Hello World form to make sure it works. Let's get moving with step 1. In step 1, we will prepare the K2 category system with folders to store our SmartForms components. Now you should know, creating folders is not required, but it is recommended because using a logical folder structure will help to keep the K2 components and SmartForms environment organized. Because we want to build a K2 SmartForm in this scenario, we will have to use K2 Designer, which is K2's web-hosted design tool. However, K2 Designer is not limited to SmartForms design in this area, as it also has the ability to wire up data sources using K2 Smart Object technology, and you can build K2 workflows. We will not be touching on those 2 components in this course, but you can gain more experience with them in future tutorials if you choose to do so. Let's jump in now and create our category structure with K2 Designer. Now briefly, if the shortcut is not on your desktop or in your start menu because you are not using a K2 provided virtual machine for this tutorial, check with your K2 administrator to find out what the web address is for your K2 Designer environment, and then open the site using your favorite web browser. We can launch K2 Designer by going to Start, All Programs, then select K2 Black Pearl, K2 SmartForms, and you should find the K2 Designer shortcut in here. In this step, we will create a new category under All Items for our application. You can expand all items first by selecting the plus sign to open up the tree, then right-click All Items and select New Category from the context menu that appears. And here, let's go ahead and name this new category K2 Learning and click OK. If you do work through some of our additional tutorials, you can create those application categories all under this K2 Learning category to keep them organized. If you are sharing this environment with others, also consider using a unique way to identify your own applications by appending your name or initials to the category name to distinguish it from other users' tutorials. You should be aware that these categories may be visible to other users in your organization. Let's move on and create another new category under K2 Learning and name it Hello World for this application. Then from there, we can create 2 new categories under Hello World and name the first one Forms. We can save that back. And create another category called Views. And save that one. At this point, your category folders should look like my screen here when you're done. For this step, we created categories or folders for the elements of our Hello World application. Remember, categories are not required, but they do help you keep your environment clean and organized, especially as you build larger applications that contain multiple forms, views, smart objects, and workflows. In step 2, we will begin our form and view construction by creating our Hello World view. This view will contain a label, a text box, and a button control. The button control will be configured with a role to show a message after it has been clicked. Let's take a moment to discuss what views are. Remember that views are logical groups of content. One form might contain several views, and views by themselves cannot be accessed by users. They must be contained within a form for your users to open them within an application and submit them. Let's right-click the Views category in K2 Designer and select New View. If the introduction page opens up, click Next to move on to the General page. Here we can use the general page to set up the basic configuration of our view. Let's give it the name of Hello World. Make sure that Item View is selected for the view type. And since we're not integrating this form with a data source, we will not need to change anything with the data source field in this tutorial. You can click Next to move on. On the layout screen, we're going to add a layout table to help us with the structure of the view. Here you can click Create Layout Table Only, and then set the number of columns to 2, and the number of rows to 2, and click OK. This sends it back to the design canvas. Now the design canvas allows us to add and manage controls within the view. We can add in our text fields, buttons, labels, and more here. Expand the controls pane over here on the right side of the page, then drag a label control into the first table cell. Select the label control to highlight it. Here we want to give it a more meaningful name than just the word label. In the Properties pane down on the lower right, change the name of this label to Name Label, because the text box we add in next that's associated with this label will be used to capture a person's name. Go to the text property next and change the value that gets displayed to users when the view loads up in a form. Here type in the text, enter your name with a colon. Going back up to the Controls pane, let's drag a text box control into the second table cell. Highlight this text box, and then from the Properties pane, change the name to Name Text Box. Confirm that the text property is empty. We do not need a default text box display value for this exercise. And then let's change the width of this text box to 200 pixels. You can enter in 200 px. Now, going back up to the Controls pane again, scroll down to the Action group of controls if you don't see it immediately in the window, and drag a button control into the first table cell on the second row. Highlight the button, and then in the Properties pane, change its name to Submit Button, and then change its text to the words Say Hi with an exclamation point. Now let's make this a little more pleasing to the eye by changing the width of the table's first column. We can do this by dragging the center column line graphically to the left so that it aligns with the Enter Your Name label. Great! At this point, your view should resemble what you see on my screen. Feel free to pause the video here if you need a little more time to catch up or absorb what we've done. Let's move on. Now that we've created our basic view and have applied some formatting to the name text box width and table column width, we are ready to add a rule to the Submit button. Once we've added that rule to the Submit button, we will also add a condition to it that essentially turns the name text box into a required field. Then for some visual feedback, we will add an action that shows the user a message after they have clicked the button. Moving into this section, let's talk briefly about rules. Rules can contain 3 main items that make them work: events, conditions, and actions. An event is when something occurs, such as when a button is clicked. A condition checks to see if certain criteria has been met, such as required form fields being filled in. And an action says do something if the event and conditions are met, such as start a workflow. To add a rule to the Submit button, let's click the Submit button once to highlight it. Then over here, click the Controls Rules tab at the bottom of the Properties pane on the lower right, and click Add Rule. The first step in here is to add the event. Now remember, an event is when something happens. In our case, it's when the Submit button is clicked. In the Rule Designer, notice there are 2 panes. On the left side, grouped by tabs, are all the events, conditions, and actions that K2 offers out of the box. On the right side is the Rule Definition pane. This is where you define the conditions and actions for each rule. Notice that the rule we are currently working with, when the control is clicked, is shown at the top of the Rule Definition pane in the tab. And then notice just below the rule title, K2 has added the base rule that we can work with here. Because we had the Submit button highlighted when we added the rule, K2 added the default method clicked for you automatically. The next step for us is to add our condition to require a value in the name text box. Select the Conditions tab over here in the lower left of the window. Then scroll down through the available conditions until you reach the group called Validation. Click once on the condition called View Passes Validation to add this condition to the rule when the control is clicked over here on the right. Now we can configure this validation setting by clicking on the configure link. And all we have to do on this configuration screen is basically check the required box next to the name text box and click OK. Now that we've configured a condition to require the name text box, the next configuration to our rule is to add an action to show a message. So select the Actions tab over here on the left side of the window. Now remember, in the previous task, we scrolled through the conditions until we found the validation condition, which can become a bit cumbersome as the options list here is quite large. As you work with rules, you will become more familiar with the terminology in these lists, which makes using the search box to quickly locate the definition you want to add a nice feature to speed up your design. Up here in the search box, enter the word message, and then click the search icon. Notice that the list filters down to the actions that have the word message in them. Click once on the action called Show a Message to add it to the rule definition pane. And click the configure link for this action. We need to configure the content of the message shown to the user so that it resembles the image here. For the title, enter in Hello World. Then for the heading, enter in Hi with an exclamation point. For the body, enter in the word hello with a space after it, and then what we want to do is actually drop the name of the person that was entered into the text box right after the word hello. To make this happen, we need to discuss the context browser that you see here on the right for this wizard. You'll see this context browser or a version of it throughout just about all of K2's wizards when it comes to designing forms and workflows. K2 has access to data objects that relate to the forms and workflows as your application runs, like values in text boxes, system values like current date or current user, and database records. At design time, the context browser contains pointers to these data objects by representing them in what K2 calls references or item references. We can gain access to the name text box over in the context browser by expanding the Hello World view from the list, since this is where the text box lives. Then you can open up its collection of controls from here. Now drag the name text box reference over and drop it in line with the text hello. You should see the green box drop in. What will happen at runtime for the form is basically this. After the submit button is clicked, K2 knows to pull the value currently in the name text box and drop it in the message body in place of this placeholder reference, and it will show the message to the user with the value they entered in the text box. Let's add a system reference to today's date in this message as well. After the name text box, enter 2 new lines, and then put in the text "today is" with a colon. And once you get that, drag the current date from the system values over and drop it after the text "today is." And that's all we'll do here. So you can click OK to close the message configuration screen, and click OK once again to close the rule designer. And then you can select Finish just below the Properties pane to close the view designer. The last thing we'll do here is test this view. With the Hello World view highlighted, let's click Run from the Properties window here. Put in your name in the name text box, and then click Say Hi. Confirm that the Hello World message comes up with your name and today's date. This looks pretty good, so let's do a quick review. In Step 2, we created our Hello World view. We added a label control, a text box control, and a button control. We also formatted our layout by setting the width of the text box control, and we adjusted the column width for the view table. We then added a rule that will fire off when the Submit button is clicked, and we also added a condition to require the name text box and an action to show a message if the condition was met. We just completed Step 2, where we created and tested the Hello World view from within K2 Designer. Now remember, views must be contained within a form for our users to be able to access and submit them. In Step 3, we will create a form for our Hello World view. Keep in mind, we do have the ability to design our form manually, but in this example, generating a form automatically adds the associated view to the design canvas. This is going to save us a step. So right-click the Hello World view title over here on the left, and select Generate Forms from the context menu that appears. On the first screen that pops up, change the form name to Hello World Form. And then we also want to position this form in the correct category, which is currently not the Views category. Because we generated the form directly from the view, K2 automatically assigned the View category in this setting. So select the ellipses button to the right of the category field and select Forms from the category browser. You can click OK and then select OK again to generate the form. Now from the category browser over here on the left, you can highlight the new Hello World form that appeared and click Edit. Once you get that open, notice that your view within the form here doesn't have a title that describes what it is by default. Let's double-click the text Enter View Title at the top of this view section and give it a name. We'll call it Hello World View. And then one last thing to update in our form, if we were to open this form in a browser right now, it would actually stretch the whole width of the browser. Because this is a pretty small form, we want to adjust the width of the form so that it is easier to use. Click anywhere within the form canvas, but not within the view area. And down in the Properties pane on the lower right, change the form's width to 60%. Then click Finish to save your form and exit. Before we move on to test our form in step 4, let's take another moment to discuss briefly the topic of how form and view editing and management is handled within K2. K2 requires us to use a checkout, check-in process when we create or want to edit forms and views. Basically what this means is when you want to edit views and forms, you must first check them out in your name within K2 Designer. While the form or view is checked out, you can make your changes to them, like adding a new field to an item view or dropping a new button or image on a form. These changes, however, will not be visible to your users until you check the forms and views back into K2. This prevents multiple people from making changes concurrently to the same view, and it gives you the ability to test your changes before pushing them out to your users. In this case, we'll need to check the form and view back in before our users can open the form for use. Right-click the Hello World form and select Check-in. Now, if you get a message about checking in associated views, you can click OK to continue because we want all views associated with this form to be checked in and available as well. In review, with step 3, we generated a form from the Hello World view. We formatted the form by changing the default title bar of the view and by setting the form width. Our form is now ready to be exposed to our users, which we will test in the next step. In our final step of step 4, we will test our form using an internal link and an external link. The internal link opens and processes the form from within K2 Designer, and the external link opens and processes the form from the K2 Runtime website. Now that we're done editing the form and we've checked it in for use, from the category browser, highlight the Hello World form and click Run from the options that appear here. Notice how the form opens from within K2 Designer, which is an easy way to quickly test our form to make sure it works for us. You can also see the view here as it is encompassed by the overall form. Enter a name into the name text box and submit the form. Let's confirm that the confirmation has the name entered along with today's date. And that looks good so far. Let's click on the Hello World form title once again in the category browser over here on the left. This is going to close the test form and return us to the Properties pane. Notice the Design Time URL and the Runtime URL links appear in the Properties pane here at the top. Make a note though, you may need to click the Show Properties arrow in the upper right corner to show these URLs if you don't see them on your screen. The Runtime URL is actually the external link to your live form. This will be the URL that you're going to use to publish out to your users or link to from other applications and sources. Let's click on the Runtime URL to open up the live form. Notice the form opens up in another tab or another browser here. Enter a name into the name text box and submit the form. Double check and make sure your confirmation message has the name entered in along with today's date. And that looks good here as well. You can close the confirmation message and close the browser. Let's do a quick review of Step 4. In this step, we tested the Hello World form both internally and externally. We used the run link to test the form, and we observed how it opened and processed from within K2 Designer. We also then used the runtime URL link to open and submit our form from an external browser. The big thing to remember here is that forms and views must be checked in before your users can access them, and users can only access forms from the runtime URL link. If you need to make a change to a form or a view, you must check it out, make your changes, and then check it back in. This is going to publish the forms and views to the K2 servers. Users will not be able to see any changes until the forms and views are checked back in. This brings us to the end of our Hello World build tutorial with focus on K2 Designer. Congratulations on building your very first SmartForm. You should now understand the very basics behind views, forms, controls, and roles, and how these are used to assemble SmartForms. Feel free to move on to some of our other tutorials where in them we will expand on the data, forms, workflows, and reporting components and explain how they are used together to implement K2 applications.